Hello, my name's David Runciman, and this is Past, Present, Future, the History of Ideas podcast. Today, we are beginning a season that will run over the Christmas period, which is a set of recordings of episodes that we made live at the Regent Street Cinema this autumn, with special guests discussing a series of films that we had just screened. And we're starting today with a conversation about Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, a film about murder, but also based on a real-life case in which two students were believed to have been inspired to commit murder by the works of Friedrich Nietzsche. And our guests who are going to be discussing Rope with me are the unique and uniquely successful crime-writing husband and wife duo, Nicci Gerrard and Nicci French, who write under the name Nicci French. We are going to be talking about Rope, we are going to be talking about the psychology of murder, and we're going to be talking about Nietzsche. We are very conscious, PPF producer Helen and I, that these are slightly unusual episodes that you're about to hear in this season, in that the audience that we were talking to, like the people talking, had just seen the films in question. And though it would be great if any of you have just watched Rope, we're assuming most of you haven't. I want to say a bit about the film, therefore, and a bit about some of the topics that we'll be discussing before you hear my conversation with Nicci and Sean. Rope was released in 1948, which was a slightly fallow period for Hitchcock. Some of his most famous films are a bit before and after the late 1940s. Wasn't his most successful time. This was not a successful film, as you'll hear. It's probably the stagiest of all of Hitchcock's films, and that's partly because it was based on a stage play, Rope, by Patrick Hamilton, which was first produced in London in 1929. Nicci French, before he became part of Nicci French, was the biographer of Patrick Hamilton. So you'll also hear us talking a bit about the author of the original play. And that play was inspired by, Hamilton always claimed very loosely, the real-life case of Leopold and Loeb from 1924, the case of two University of Chicago students who were convicted of what they had thought was the perfect crime, but actually was an embarrassingly cack-handed crime, the murder by two 19-year-olds of a younger boy, which they did to prove they were superior beings, or at least that's what emerged at the trial. They were corrupted, it was believed, by their education, and particularly by their reading of Nietzsche. They were trying to show that they were beyond convention, beyond morality, beyond good and evil. And to do that, they killed someone. And this film, like the play on which it's based, is a version of that story. So it's not Leopold and Loeb. In this film, we see it begin with the act of murder itself. So the very first shot, more or less, is the killing. It's the strangling of a student by two fellow students. So in this case, it's not a younger boy. And the two students whom we see are clearly older than 19. They're played by John Dahl and Farley Granger. We're not told how old they are, but they're a bit more sophisticated in a way than Leopold and Loeb. But what becomes clear straight away is they've committed this crime to prove something about themselves. And it emerges through the film that one of the things they're trying to prove is that they are beyond convention, beyond morality. They are superior beings. And there in the background is the thought of Friedrich Nietzsche. One of the things that makes this a very stagey film is that it all takes place on one set, in one setting, an apartment. And in this apartment, the body of the man who is killed is immediately concealed in a kind of trunk, a chest, which then has a covering thrown over it. And the two murderers, as part of their performance, their act, have agreed to throw a party, and the party takes place with the body in the trunk. They know it's there. We, the audience watching, know it's there. And a lot of the suspense of the film comes from the fact we know it's there, but the party guests don't. And the party guests include the father of the man who's been killed, his girlfriend, some of his other friends and fellow students, all of them wondering where this guy is. Why hasn't he shown up? There's a lot of conversation in the film about why he might be missing. We know why he's missing. No one else does. But the last guest to arrive is played by James Stewart, an unlikely piece of casting, which we will discuss in this episode. Stewart plays the teacher of the two murderers, a man who taught them, not at university, but at school, at some weird school they attended, and we're meant to believe gave them some of these ideas. He was a renegade teacher. He's thought to be a bit of a rebel, and this is based very much on Patrick Hamilton's Rope. This character, Rupert, he's meant to be the source of some of these dangerous and bad ideas. But he is horrified when he starts to suspect that his two former pupils have actually acted on these words, on these thoughts. For him, it was just talk. For them, it becomes a recipe for disaster. And what follows is a cat and mouse game in which he suspects them. They try and deflect him. Their attempts to deflect him more and more raise his suspicions. They become more and more ridiculous. This perfect crime unravels in some absurd ways. And their former teacher ends up, giving the ending away here, by revealing the crime and also giving them a lecture about the absurdity of taking the things that he said to them at school seriously enough to perform this monstrous act, to commit this terrible crime. Another reason that it's quite a stagey film is that it is sometimes included in lists of single tracking shot films, that is, films in which the action is covered without cuts by a single shot following the characters around. It's not actually true in this case. It's a short film, only 80 minutes long, but it's made up of a series of 10 8-minute tracking shots, quite long by any cinematic terms, but blurred between them so that actually every 8 minutes you get a slight fading out and a fading back in. That's because 8 minutes was the limit to how much physical film, and we are still in the era, pre-digital era of physical film, could be accommodated. So that was the maximum that could be done. But it does create a strange, eerie atmosphere. It's also, ostensibly at least, a film where the action is taking place in real time, though as we discuss, it does something very weird to the concept of time watching this film because it's not real time. Things happen too quickly in some ways and too slowly in others. It's an extraordinary film. There's nothing like it. And I will be talking now to Sean and Nicci about the play, about the film, about Hitchcock, about how it was made, about the weird casting, but also about those ideas that hover in the background of this film. Some of the other films in this series are more centrally about questions of philosophy or indeed philosophers. We're going to be talking about Wittgenstein. We're going to be talking about the thought of Rosa Luxemburg. Nietzsche is a vague, dim presence in the background of this film, but he is there, and it's partly about how and whether ideas corrupt. It's also a film, as the play, as the case on which the play was based, that is about the sexuality of the men who committed the crime, and that's also central to our discussion. So we are going to be talking about Hitchcock and murder and the psychology of murder, and we are also going to be talking about Nietzsche. We've just seen a film, which is a crime film, but it begins with the murder, and we know straight away who done it. And in a way, we know straight away, I think, why they done it, because it's very clear in the first minute that one of them is doing it for the sensations that he hopes it's going to evoke, and the other one is in some sense being coerced. I mean, it's there, they almost don't need to say anything. So we know who done it, we know how they done it, we know why they done it. Nicci, you've not seen this film before. What do you think it's about?
If you'd asked me that 2 minutes in, I would have said it was about sex. That scene of them killing him and then panting afterwards, it felt so kind of post-coital. But actually, at the end of the film, what I think will come back to all the other things it was about so many things, but the thing for me it felt it was about by the end was me being toyed with by Alfred Hitchcock. I felt it was like, you're made to be complicit right from the get-go. His face is there being strangled, almost as if you're strangling it. You know everything. You're the audience that they're doing it for. And everybody else, all the other cast apart from the father, who feels like he's wandered in from a different film almost, because he's kind of human and he cares. Everybody else, they're the stupid people, aren't they? Everybody else, and we're the clever people because we know. So in some ways we're coerced into being in some way complicit and then taken through this
the world's worst party.
deeply, it's 80 minutes, isn't it? 80 minutes. It's like an agony. And I don't know what you want to happen is you want the window to be thrown open because it's just so fantastically claustrophobic. I could feel my heart hurting with the stress of it. And I don't know what I was stressed by because you want them to be caught. And yet my heart was just booming away by the end. It's booming away now.
It's really interesting. I mean, I've seen the film before, but I've never seen it with an audience before. And it was really interesting. We're talking about how, there are various perpetrators in the film, but the main one is Alfred Hitchcock. And you realise the extent, because of the audience reaction, he sees it as a comedy. I mean, there's a lot of it. There's these endless jokes about, you'll be the death of me or whatever. There's just loads of them. And they only make sense. They don't make sense in the context of the characters. They make in the sense of the audience are meant to find it kind of funny that no one... I mean, one of the ideas of comedy is that the other people, they don't... You and the murderers know what's the truth, but no one else does. And for Hitchcock, that's really... I think he finds that really funny. Alfred Hitchcock set out to make the gayest film that ever been made in Hollywood. There's no doubt about that. And, there's a whole question about why he wanted to do that. But one of the strange things about watching the finished film is that everyone was involved, except they forgot to tell James Stewart. Talk about someone who's wandered in from another film. He's not in on the joke, but everyone else is.
Because, Nicci, as you say, when you first see it, you think you're watching a sex act. That's the first thing that you think.
Absolutely. It's so explicit.
And did that go away for you? Because it is one of the oddities of this film. And we'll talk a bit about the play that it's based on and Patrick Hamilton, and then we'll get on to Nietzsche and all of that.
I want to hear what you thought it was about. But did the sex bit go away? It doesn't go away at all. I mean, they're there. They're kind of lovers. There's the sex act, which is the death, the rope that's there. They're kind of understanding the subtext. It's very fleshly as well, isn't it? It's right, there's so many kind of close-ups of faces and of lips. And I kept looking at the ties as well, which was throttling. All the men were being throttled by their ties. And the lips of the young woman, Janet, is kind of with this overpainted mouth, slightly wrongly painted mouth. It feels like we're just too close up to these kind of bodies and these people standing too close to each other.
The young woman in the revival of the play, I think in 2011 at the Almeida, was played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. So that was Fleabag. What did I think it was about? So it's part of our series about films of ideas. And as I was watching it, I found myself thinking, there are serious ideas in this film. And there were certainly serious ideas in the play, although I think Patrick Hamilton said it was a throwaway. But Nietzsche is there, Freud is there, and so on. But it's kind of about the emptiness of that too, because it's so physical, it's so visceral. The relationship between these two, and then we'll come on to their relationship with the so-called dark academia teacher, happens to be played by James Stewart, who doesn't feel like he's a danger to anyone. That's part of the problem. But the relationship between the two men is so physical, and the coercion between them feels so visceral, and yet somehow we're meant to believe that behind it, they've persuaded themselves that they're doing it because of books that they read. And it's a film about books, partly.
Yeah. Well, can I say a tiny bit about the history of this? Because one Nietzschean thing is Nietzsche said that you can only define things that don't have a history. And there's a real history behind this. So this all comes from this murder, this Leopold and Loeb murder. So in 1924, these teenage they saw themselves as geniuses at the University of Chicago, had this idea of committing the perfect crime, and they kidnapped a neighbour, the teenage boy, and just killed him.
And he was 14, so it's not like this. It was a child.
Very much like it was hopelessly imperfect. They were caught immediately, and it was a total disaster. But they were influenced. Two of the key things of that trial is that they read Nietzsche, and they thought that gave them the right to do it. And the other thing that made it, and was a huge sensation in America, was they were gay. And part of the case, they read out their kind of very explicit messages between them. And one of the reasons they were not sentenced to death was the defence was because they were clearly insane because they were so gay. And so that was in 1924. In 1929, Patrick Hamilton does this play, Rope, which he completely dishonestly says was not based on the Leopold and Loeb case. It totally is. And again, Nietzsche features in that play. I mean, Francois Truffaut famously said of Hitchcock that all his murders are like love scenes and his love scenes are like murders. He did this whole thing when he made the film. He secretly set out to make, Arthur Lawrence, who was openly gay, the person who did the adaptation. Hitchcock knew that Arthur Lawrence was having an affair with Farley Granger, who played Philip in the film. So behind the whole making of the film was this kind of complex gay subtext. And they got the film made. It all worked until the studio saw the film. And then they buried it, and it was a total financial disaster because it was so obviously inflammatory. Because, of course, it was a criminal offence at the time to even suggest gay sex.
Nicci, what did you think of the character of Rupert, played by James Stewart? So I want to talk a little bit in a moment about the character of Rupert in the play, because it's different and the context makes it a very, very different kind of role. But in this film, I mean, it does feel like part of the problem it's just not plausible that this man could corrupt anyone.
So he's so mild and bewildered, you mean? So you're saying that Cary Grant was approached for the... because clearly it's a menage a many people. So there's Philip and Brandon, who are clearly lovers. There's David, who they've kind of had sex with by killing, even if they hadn't had sex with beforehand. And then clearly, I think James Stewart is meant to be the fourth person in this group. He's supposed to be an ambiguous character, I think, but he's just not. He just walks in and ruffles his brow a bit and he wears a beautiful suit.
And he gives that weird, supposedly humorous little speech about murder, which is meant to be the sign that this is a dangerous man with dangerous ideas.
I mean, that speech seems to me to fall flat, and the speech at the end. Because the whole thing about, you say it's about Nietzsche, it's kind of about Nietzsche, isn't it? But that's like the kind of Nietzsche that schoolboys, I guess that's the point. It's the Nietzsche for schoolboys. It's the kind of aphorism Nietzsche. It's the everyone is free Nietzsche. It's got no kind of deep roots to it, it seems to me.
But even the aphorism Nietzsche probably wouldn't be presented as, what is it, Strangulation Day or Stabbing Week, like the Milk Marketing Board.
But then that's what Sean, I mean, in a way, when I was watching it, it's partly I was thinking, oh, God, get me out of here. It was so claustrophobic, and that was the whole thing about real time and everything just being stuck in these two terrifying rooms with this trunk with a body in it. So in a way, there's a way in which you're desperate to kind of leave that room and leave everyone behind. But also, it is like a drawing room comedy, isn't it? It's got the kind of manners of kind of people kind of making silly little jokes and everyone tittering politely. So it's very uneasy in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, you feel that Donna Tartt, The Secret History, must be influenced. So it's that kind of claustrophobic, feverish, private, sort of boarding school, people thinking they're cleverer than everyone else and having these sort of secret relationships with a teacher they have a kind of ambivalent relationship to. I think the Nietzsche thing it's about kind of hidden knowledge, isn't it? About things that we, the elite. I mean, I think Nietzsche did represent that in the 20th century to a certain degree. It's this very, very dangerous. It's like this inflammatory philosophy that's only for certain people, I mean, it's funny that how many people have been, even leaping forward, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady read Nietzsche as well.
Someone that I worked with at Cambridge, a very distinguished philosopher, used to say that we shouldn't let the students read Nietzsche because the quote was, it's bad for the character.
Nietzsche and Sylvia Plath, maybe. I mean, you said it comes from, it's about books, it's about knowledge in books. It's about making films, isn't it? I mean, the whole thing about this setup of it being in real time and following the characters around and nobody can put a foot wrong, and that kind of nervousness. I mean, part of my nervousness watching it was partly just because it's very nerve-wracking, but also just it's in real time, so they might kind of fluff the lines.
And you're watching him light the candles and you think, is he going to be able to light the candles?
I think that's absolutely, I think there is this, I think it's a really imperfect film, but sometimes directors' imperfect films are more interesting than their perfect ones because they reveal certain things. And there's something, I so agree with that. There's something about very long takes where you get slight nervousness about it and you feel, I mean, it's actually, I don't know if people agree generally that it's very gripping, but it's quite an unpleasant film to watch, I think, just because you're just feeling, all the time feeling agitated, and which I think you're meant to feel, because he very brilliantly gets you to identify with the killers, because you know that there's this body there. And I was really struck this time, I think the best Hitchcockian sequence in the whole film, which is so audacious, is that very long, slow sequence where suddenly you move away from everyone who's talking and you look right down the apartment, and the maid just walks back and forward. And what you realise she's doing, but you gradually realise she's clearing the top of the chest and she's preparing to lift it up and reveal the body. And it's a brilliant bit of, and making use again, because of the fact it's in a single take. So you're really forced to suffer along with the characters.
And it is a film that does something very odd with time. So it's 80 minutes, but it feels a lot longer. And yet at the same time, that's the world's shortest party. If that was meant to be happening in real time, they arrive, they have 2 courses. I know they're not eating.
They have champagne. They have disgusting pudding.
And they don't all leave in a huff. It kind of comes to a natural end. And there is that very unnerving sequence with the metronome, which does make me very, very uncomfortable and anxious, because time has gone crazy anyway. And now it's not like the clock is ticking, because it's going much faster.
Yeah, and the sky darkens too quickly.
The sky is insane in that film. I mean, not least the clouds. So when you look at the changing backdrop, I think they're meant to be clouds. I have to say, the first time I saw it, I thought, oh my God, the buildings are on fire. And I'm not joking, it looked like 9/11. Because the way that the clouds are done, they're coming out of the top of the skyscrapers like the skyscrapers have blown up.
One of Hitchcock's famous maxims is the secret of a thriller is to make a beautiful woman suffer. And in a way, I think this is different. I think in this case, he really makes the audience suffer. I mean, I think because the fact that there was a big argument when they started. I mean, Arthur Lawrence, the screenwriter, thought it was a real mistake to see the murder at the beginning. He said you shouldn't see it because you shouldn't know whether there really is a body there. And that's completely wrong. You know, that's absolutely Hitchcock's idea of suspense. We absolutely know all the time there's a body there. I think it's a brilliant film to that extent. I really don't enjoy watching it very much because I think that it is just, he puts in a very uncomfortable position where you feel what they've done is so terrible. It's so clear they've killed an innocent person. And yet you're kind of, oh dear, are they going to get caught, you know?
So you talk about the beautiful woman. Can we talk about the women in it? What do you think of the women in this film? It's a kind of very gay film, but it also feels like quite a homophobic film. And it also feels like quite a misogynist film. You get these 3 women. There's the Mrs. Wilson. I mean, look at their costumes are so strange. And Mrs. Wilson kind of decorates and she has these little pom-poms on her head. And Janet is wearing this strange kind of ruffled dress. And as I say, these lips which are slightly wrongly drawn in. And then there's the sister-in-law, who's like a kind of real broad, grotesque character. The film is about derision, isn't it? But most of the derision seems to be directed towards those 3 women to me.
Well, it's clear that the main woman, has been passed around by the men as a kind of plaything. And it's really, really kind of creepy. I mean, I feel in a way that it's Hitchcock's fantasy of being gay. It's a kind of weird homophobia coming from his imagining what the way he sees these kind of effete gay men seeing the world. And they see women as these kind of strange creatures from another, slightly repellent.
So Patrick Hamilton, who wrote the play, had a complicated view of women as well. Is the original play as misogynist as that film?
The play is completely different. There's almost not. It has the basic situation is very accurately kept, but there's almost not a word kept. And the real thing is the play has no humour at all. Where this has this very creepy, strange humour running all the way through it. So I would say that's the main difference. I think in a way what Hitchcock and Patrick Hamilton shared was in neither of them. There's no relationship between a man and a woman that isn't sadistic in some way. I think they were both very sexually tormented.
And Hamilton lived to see the film.
Well, he was hired to write the first version, and then they just totally junked his version. He went to see it, and he hated it. Just hated it with a passion. He said it was one of those terrible experiences of his life seeing that film. And I think partly because I think he felt very anxious about the gay thing, which is definitely there. And to have a director who'd run with it to the degree that he had, I think he just was deeply, deeply shocked.
So I do want to say something about Nietzsche, because we're talking about ideas. And it does seem to me that the big difference in context between the play and the film is the war after which each took place. So the play is a post-First World War production. And Nietzsche was still glamorous. Nietzsche was associated in the 1920s with the Germans, the wrong side. But he had a glamour. He certainly influenced a lot of artists. He influenced a lot of thinkers in all sorts of different ways. And he was still, I think, thought in some respects to be a kind of international figure. In this film, he's associated with Hitler. And there is that very weird little sequence where they talk about the Nazis. And it colours the whole thing. The other difference is the Rupert character is a war veteran in both the play and the film. He has a limp. In the play, it says very explicitly he has a limp, and James Stewart in the film is seen to be limping. And in the play, it seems to me the biggest difference is the equivalent of the Strangulation Week speech is a very serious, non-humorous speech in which Rupert says, if you'd been in the trenches, you wouldn't think there was much difference between murder and murder. That is, I'm a killer, I've killed people, I'm back from a war, and now you tell me with your civilized morality that murder is bad. Tell that to someone who has seen what I've seen. And you get nothing of that in this. I got no sense that we were dealing with one person among these young men who had seen real killing.
No.
I've just on the Nietzsche thing is, I mean, I hope there are no major Nietzsche scholars in the audience, but from my understanding, that there clearly was a kind of way in which Nietzsche became a kind of figure, like a cardboard figure that represented this. But actually, Nietzsche was definitely not in favour of, when he talked about his idea, God is dead, he was not saying God is dead, therefore everything is allowed in a kind of Dostoevskian way. He was more like a diagnosis. He said, we're in a Christian culture and no one believes this anymore. No one really believes it anymore, but we're stuck with the morality. He thought we're stuck with the worst kind of Christian morality, which is we kind of feel guilty, we feel internal shame, and we need to throw off all that kind of guilt. But he didn't mean then we can throw off and just go and kill people. It was more like discover real values. His idea of the Superman was someone more like Beethoven or something like that. Or it wasn't, Donald Trump. But the way it's printed, if you read, there is a question, why do people keep misreading it? And Nietzsche does write in all these layers of kind of irony, and he writes, he's very violent, his language, his rhetoric. So it's not really surprising that people misread it as, oh my God, yes, I can go, better to go and kill someone than just go to the office every day or something.
Well, in this, it's like the horror of ordinariness, isn't it?
I mean, he did also think that a version of the Superman was Napoleon. So there is that side of it, which I think Hamilton's play picks up. That line that if you kill one person, it's murder. And if you kill 1 million people, you're a hero. That's Napoleon. Napoleon killed a lot more people than these two ever would. But it's exactly that in this case, that philosophy becomes pathetic. It's childish. It's a childish version of a serious philosophy, which is about a society that's got its values so mixed up, it doesn't know the difference between slaughter on a vast scale and its personal morality.
But to come back to what Sean was saying about, how has Nietzsche been so misread so many times? Nietzsche, the people I know who love Nietzsche, mostly men, and often they're young men, aren't they? He has this absolute pull on a certain kind of clever, young man, which is dangerous.
Yeah, and I think the appeal is that it still feels very dangerous. I think to read Nietzsche is to encounter ideas that come off the page, and a bit like this film, even though Nietzsche is funny, really funny, it's very claustrophobic, but it also feels like you're in something where something really dangerous is going on. And I think for a lot of younger readers, there's something exhilarating about that. So there's
something dangerous that's going on is what? Is just...
There's something dangerous, I think, is not, like Sean says, that you're told you can do whatever you like. It's very clear in Nietzsche, you're not told you can do whatever you like. But you are told in a way to reflect on what you're capable of and also sort of where you rank. So it is partly about hierarchy. Nietzsche did have a hierarchical view of human beings. Didn't mean this lot could kill this lot, but it did mean that this lot didn't particularly have to worry about what this lot thought of them. Okay. So I think if you are a young man that could be a liberating idea, but it also forces you to do the thing that you are doing all the time, which is thinking, am I one of the special ones or not? And if I'm not one of the special ones, what the hell does that mean about me? And that may be the point at which you think, I better try and be one of the special ones. I mean, these two in this film, they're many things, but you wouldn't want to hang out with them. I mean, they're bores apart from anything else. Yeah. The conversation, the sparkling conversation is deathly.
I mean, I wonder if one of the is Nietzsche is mentioned in the film, but also Freud is mentioned in the film. And I wonder, I mean, I think that he's sort of playing with ideas in this film, which he did in much better films afterward. And maybe it was more the Freudian idea of, about what our private fantasy life is really like, which is not so much a Nietzschean thing and more a Freud. So, I mean, the way he did, the idea of the two men planning a murder is so much more interesting in Strangers on a Train, I would say. And actually the idea of voyeurism and the idea of being in this one set and sort of looking out of is done so much more interestingly in Rear Window. And actually it's funny that James Stewart he's just so poor. He just feels in this thing, but then suddenly in Rear Window and then in Vertigo, he really becomes a completely different actor and actually manages to express all the things he can't express in this film, kinds of self-loathing and weird, perverse kind of sexuality.
In Rear Window, he's the voyeur, isn't he? Whereas in this film, we're the voyeurs.
But do you think part of the problem with this film, in those other films, James Stewart essentially starts out as a relatively regular person and something dark happens and his character darkens. In this, he's meant to start dark. This is dark academia. He's the guy who at this weird prep school, wherever it is, is meant to have corrupted these young men, I don't know what age they were meant to be, with Nietzsche. And by the end of the film, when he's ranting and raving, it's like a scene from It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
It's a bit like George Bailey at that moment where he also confronts a very selfish philosophy. In that film, it's Potterism rather than Nietzscheanism, and kind of rants against it. So what's unconvincing in this film is you never believe he was dark to start with. You always, with James Stewart, believe that to start with, he was an innocent. And then when he darkens, it's fascinating. Watching the dark, sort of difficult, complicated Nietzschean James Stewart arrive at morality is completely impossible.
Yeah. And very swift as well.
Yeah, well, it's all very swift, isn't it?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think in a way behind this, in a way Nietzsche stands in for this. You think it's, it's from 1948 this film was made. The audience are full of people who've just come back from the war. And it is this recognition, and probably even then we're only just starting to see the film of the concentration camps, and people were suddenly having to reckon with something about the way humans behave. And I think Nietzsche became a sort of, rather than people going and actually reading Thus Spake Zarathustra and, the genealogy of morality, it's more like, I think he becomes a figure of, kind of symbol of, oh my God, we're going to have to face up to what human beings can actually do. And I think this film feels like a really early, Hitchcock did it much more, suddenly worked out how to do it in a more achieved way.
As you say, it's based on a real-life story. So there's an extraordinary tale behind this. There were two 19-year-old boys who did read Nietzsche. They did murder a 14-year-old neighbour of theirs. One of them clearly was the coercer and one of them was the coerced. They were also lovers. One of them did leave his spectacles behind at the scene, having said, this is going to be a perfect crime. They'll never catch us. He then got a special pair of spectacles made that could be identified with him, and he left them by the body. It's ridiculous. And I want to ask you about crime writing here. Yeah. You write about people who are capable of murder and indeed do commit murder occasionally. And you're not basing these on real stories on the whole. You are making them up. I mean, I don't know what inspires you to write them. You may have read something or seen something, but you are making them up. When you look at these two, and we're meant to believe they are capable of this act, I don't know whether you think it's convincing or not. When you are trying to make your readers believe that the people that you write about are capable of these acts, is it about getting them inside their heads? What is the thing? I want to know, what is the thing that you do that is maybe missing from this film?
Wow. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that it's not a kind of Manichaean world that we're inhabiting in the thrillers that we write. So it's like They're events that happen to ordinary people, and they're mostly done by ordinary people in the sense that it's like domestic noir. It's like a kind of intimate terror of what everyone is capable of. And I don't think we've ever written a novel in which something is done for kind of ideological or intellectual reasons. It's more like the weirdness of what it is to be human, and the things that we can do to each other, often just kind of randomly.
Actually, I would say that the books we write, the stories we're interested in, are actually quite, have something in common with this sort of film.
Oh, really?
Because it's
This is not,
because it's about just. I mean, I think one of the things we're interested in is how little you don't have to worry so much about your enemies. It's more your friends you have to worry about, and how how little you really know, even someone you're married to, or what do people say about you when you're out of the room? All those sort of anxieties we all have. And then if you turn the dial a bit, and I think in a way this sort of situation, I mean, so often when crimes happen or terrible things happen, people are just taken, but they didn't realise what their partner was thinking, or they didn't realise the life that their friend, the secret. I mean, that's the thing is, we all have secrets, and everyone is complicated and has their crazy side. And if you feel that someone doesn't have their crazy side, it's because you don't know them well enough, And I think all Hitchcock's films play on that idea that the mind is such a dark place, and just ordinary relationships are a site
the mind is a dark place. I mean, it's very unusual that there are collaborative acts of murder, because one of the things that is said that is when people commit murder, it's really common for them to say, "It happened to me. This madness happened to me." They don't think it's their real self. They feel it's like an aberration. People very rarely face up to what they've done because they can't bear to go that deep into themselves and realise that they are a murderer. It's not just that they kind of fell into it, that it was unfortunate. And I think most of us are like that. That's the labyrinth of the mind goes on. And in almost everybody, there's the capacity to do terrible things, often for kind of very mundane reasons. I mean, like shame. I think shame is one of the big motives for people committing terrible crimes. I mean, it feels like a trivial emotion, but it's huge. And those are the kind of things that we talk about when we talk about our books.
We grow up being told, telling our children, don't talk to strangers. Well, actually, you're probably much safer with a stranger than you are with people in your own family, aren't you? Most people are killed by people who know them. And those, the intense passions generated in families, and in relationships, those are the interesting, dangerous ones.
So one, I guess, ambiguity in the film, as you watch it, you can't quite make up your mind. I certainly couldn't, but it's addressed right at the end, is, does he want to be caught? Does he want people to see how clever he is? But of course, that's a nonsense, because if he's caught, it's no longer the perfect crime. It's no longer clever. It's ridiculous. He's just a child who's read Nietzsche and decided to murder someone. But there's something weird going on in this story.
I mean, both, isn't it? Because everything he says, it's like pointing to it. It's kind of all his sentences are about death and hiding it and the perfect crime. And he's such a show-off, isn't he? He wants to be clever, but as you say, the very act of being discovered means he's not clever. So he's caught in this terrible double bind.
Because the other possibility is that it is all motivated by shame. And maybe that's what we are meant to try and intuit from this. As Sean said, in the original trial of Leopold and Loeb, they were defended by Clarence Darrow, the great lawyer of the age. And the defence was what was called, I think, the gay panic.
Oh, so
which is that they were out of their minds with a kind of shame. They couldn't be responsible for what they were doing because they had found themselves in a homosexual relationship, which is so shocking even for the people in the relationship that they might lose their minds and commit murder.
But I think
that was the defence. That's why they weren't executed.
So that's really interesting. And now I'm going to have to watch the film again because I didn't think about that.
I think what drew Hitchcock to it is the homosexuality was as shocking as the murder, in the trial. That it was suddenly this thing was exposed that no one was allowed to talk about. And I think that's the kind of confusion in this film about homoerotic passion and murderousness is something that Hitchcock is just constantly playing with through the film.
So I believe in the original play, I've read a description of it where the character of Rupert is described as Wildian, as in Oscar Wilde. Right. He's a poet. he is a corrupter of the young.
It should be a sort of Oscar Wilde figure, but James Stewart is not the person you think of as playing Oscar Wilde. I mean, he should be someone, he's playing just in the way that Wilde did, playing with these dangerous ideas. In the end, when you find yourself in the legal system, suddenly look very different.
And there's a line in the film that made me think of that, where one of them says to Rupert, the James Stewart character, "You just use words for how they sound, not how they mean." No, he doesn't. Yeah. Oscar Wilde, the idea that there's an aesthete here. It was an aesthetic kind of character that Rupert portrayed. But as you were speaking, it reminded me of the trial of Oscar Wilde, the criminal trial, not the libel trial, the one at which he was convicted, at the end of which the judge, who had presided over many murder cases, said, "This is by far the worst case I have ever tried, because you appear to have had a form of sexual relationship with young men of a different class," basically. And, I've sat through many murder trials, but nothing has shocked me as much as this. And 1940s America is closer to that world by far than it is to our world.
Yeah. I mean, they were playing with, since everyone involved, pretty much everyone involved apart from James Stewart, and Hitchcock was very ambiguous about this, but they were, Hitchcock hired both the two, John Dahl and Farley Granger are both gay. And in fact, the original, Hitchcock wanted the John Dahl character, Brandon, to be played by Montgomery Clift. That would have been amazing. If you had Montgomery Clift and Cary Grant, that would be mind-blowing. But as soon as Montgomery Clift and Cary Grant got a whiff of the script, they thought, they're not going anywhere near that.
Because they were in the closet.
Yeah, that's right.
And the other thing that is sometimes said about this film, but I don't think it works because it's not a closet, it's a chest, is that the theme running through it is that there's a man in the closet.
Well,
Right, on that note.
You mentioned that the studio reacted to the film extremely negatively because of the gay, I was going to say subtext, but I guess text. But I have two questions about that. One, do you know the extent to which the viewing public had a reaction along those lines? And also, how similar was the original play in that particular regard? And what was the sort of public reaction to that?
That's a really good question. Well, what the studio did was just basically to have a very limited release. So I think it was an absolute flop. It was seen by very few people. And I think most of the reviews really the publicity was so much about this whole novelty about doing it in single take. So I think that's what people talked about overwhelmingly.
I mean, to be clear, it's not a single take, right?
No,
it's about 7 or 8 takes.
Basically, you couldn't do it longer than a reel, so it's 8 minutes, and they do these some rather poor.
They go behind someone's back.
Nevertheless,
and with very heavy cameras, right?
Yeah, every time the camera goes through a door, they have to the men had to on rollers pull the set apart. Compared with the play, Arthur Lawrence, he claimed he was hired to de-gay the play. The original is full of people saying like "my dear boy," which he read, in America read as very gay. Actually, weirdly, it's one of the few bits of the play in the English context isn't so gay. Pat Hamilton said that casting Rupert, you always had to get a very masculine actor. Otherwise, he said, could seem gay. But for me, I think the film is way more overtly in-your-face gay.
I mean, what would the film be without being gay?
The way John Dahl and Farley Granger, they're so physical. The whole issue, again, it's very hard for especially younger people here to realise. I grew up not realising that sort of Larry Grayson was gay properly, I remember Clive James wrote, who was a great admirer of Auden, and he said when Auden died, he hadn't realised that Auden was gay, which is absolutely, it was so, the culture was so homophobic that it was amazing how suppressed. One of the things in this film and quite a few other Hitchcock films and other Hollywood films, there are lots of things that are gay-coded, characters who are clearly meant to be gay. And most of the audience wouldn't have spotted it at all, but a kind of gay audience would have absolutely,
What
seen
do gay people think of the film?
One of the most prominent gay critics, Mark Harris, who wrote a biography of Mike Nichols and people like that, he's a big fan of this film because he said growing up, he said, okay, it may be homophobic, but it was at least we were being recognised,
I just wanted to ask you said about the playwright being outraged about Rope when he saw it, horrified. Just about your own writing, whether it's been in the adaptations, whether you've been involved, and if not, how you've reacted.
Okay, so we've had how many books? We've had several books adapted for television dramas. And the main thing to say is when you sell the rights to your book to be made into a film, you have no say in it. You lose control of it, and you take the money, and you have no right to complain either, because you've taken the money. And we've had some quite good things made of several of our books, and we've had a film made of one of our books, which, how tactful am I supposed to be here?
Don't be
Which
tactful.
wasn't a great success. And in fact, it became almost like a cult bad movie. But the thing is, when something is made into a film, they almost have to tear it up and begin again. And everyone put their heart and soul into the venture, and it just went terribly wrong. It's a very strange thing, because it's something that it's your kind of, it comes from inside of you, and then you see it on a screen, and it feels so strange and unfamiliar. Wonderful when it works, and really just a very dislocating feeling when it doesn't work, or a dislocating feeling anyway, because it's become something else. It's become strange to you.
With that one, when did you know it was going wrong? Was it when you saw the final product, or could
Sean,
you sense
you
it
can
was going
speak,
wrong
Sean.
earlier?
It's funny.
I mean, should we name the film?
It was our third book. It was made, a film called Killing Me Softly. And it was amazing. It was a fantastic, great director and amazing cast and everything.
And I should say it's a great novel as well.
Thank you, yes.
But it is. I mean, it's a great book.
We visited the set, and when if anyone's been on a film set, it was everything is so professional. It's so amazing, and shutting whole streets down. Some little scene you wrote, they've had to close scene and have fake buses going down. And then, so we went to the cast and crew screening, and it was 2 minutes. When something doesn't work, it just doesn't work, and you can just smell it.
As the credits were rolling at the beginning,
It's funny,
it just had the smell of something that had gone wrong.
But did the cast and crew? Could you tell? Could they sense it too? Seeing it for the first time.
I think while it was going on, the cast and crew knew it was going wrong. We were just in blithe ignorance. We were going along and being on the set and thinking it was very glamorous, and then.
If you've been on a film set, it's like having a building site, and then every 2 seconds they stop and silence, and actors have to act a bit. And the miracle that process can be turned into a story that, like here, makes you feel frightened or makes you cry or laugh. I mean, the really extraordinary thing is how it comes together. The effort it takes to make a film that doesn't work, it's made me I feel much more reluctant to criticise people, because it's the miracle is when it all comes together.
I don't want to compare myself to this at all. I have one tiny version of this experience, which is, this is going to sound really bizarre, but I wrote an article in the London Review of Books about Lance Armstrong and drug taking in cycling, and the film director Stephen Frears read it. And by a circuitous route, he then ended up making a film, and he told me it was because he'd read this article about Lance Armstrong called The Programme. And I went to the cast and crew screening, and I didn't realise within 2 minutes, but about halfway through, because I think it's one of his least successful films, and it doesn't work. And I just was so embarrassed. And I kind of thought, it's my fault.
Embarrassed for yourself? You mean
which is a very egotistical thing to think.
You felt shamed?
I just thought, this is never going to happen to me again. It's Stephen Frears, and so it should be great. And I don't know why, but for some reason, it just didn't work. It had Dustin Hoffman in it, for God's sake. And it flopped. Sorry to everyone involved.
I mean, but it's a strange thing, because you write a novel is just like one, or in our case, 2 people, and it's so streamlined. It's just you alone in your room with your thoughts. And a film is an industry, isn't it? It's like a great big juggernaut. And it gets going, and it's just out of control. You can't do anything about it. It just rumbles along.
But there's also something almost mystical about it. If we get back to Hitchcock, in the 50s, really starting from, he had this staggering run of masterpieces. They're just amazing films. And then in the early 60s, it just went away, just like his muse had just gone. He made films that were just awful. Strange. It's just the miracle, again, maybe is the great ones he did,
It's like David Bowie albums.
So I have a question about the tension in the film between language, meaning, and responsibility. And one of you had brought up the line earlier that Brandon claims that Rupert uses words because of how they sound, not because of what they mean. And then Rupert challenges that later by basically saying that Brandon has taken his words and laid a meaning on them that he never intended. So what does the film kind of suggest about an ethical responsibility of speech? Are we to assume that words always are to be misappropriated, or that to speak at all creates some sense of responsibility?
It's a great question.
It is a great
Who wants to
question.
take it?
You can start.
I mean, we didn't really talk about it actually much so far, but it is clearly one of the themes in this. The taunt to Rupert is you say it, but you don't act it. And for you, these are just words. And it does feel like, and it's so complicated because it's James Stewart, so you don't really know what you're meant to be thinking about the role and the performance, but it's like he's a little ashamed of that too. When that is thrown at him, there's a little bit where he kind of steps back, and it's as though he feels, well, that's true, actually. I never have acted on my speech. And then he comes to his senses and he responds, which is, thank God I've never acted on my speech. And it's related to that dark academia theme that the kids who are taught by the brilliant, it's like Sean said, Donna Tartt and The Secret History, and the kids take it seriously. And the teacher at some point, and this certainly says, you weren't meant to take it seriously. Didn't you realize this was just... And they could legitimately say, how were we meant to know we weren't meant to take it seriously, particularly if you were saying this to us outside of the classroom? The implication is actually you were doing this as friendship with us. So you were no longer our teacher. You
Or
were
in
our
bed
friend.
with them, I thought.
Or in bed with us, exactly.
And so, because in a way, if you'd had someone different playing that part, it would be more plausible to say he is responsible. He's not just the hero and the detective. He's also one of the villains in this, isn't he? He had these impressionable boys, these clever boys who wanted to kind of make an impression on him and wanted to play. In a way, he's been summoned so they can show him the fruits of his words, hasn't he? So he's equally responsible in some ways.
One of the scary things about the real case, Leopold and Loeb, is that they were genuinely these products of a kind of hothousing education system. I think one or other of them was the youngest ever undergraduate at the University of Chicago or University of Michigan. I can't remember which. Was it Chicago? The youngest ever undergraduate.
Yeah.
Chicago had a thing, because later it was Susan Sontag and George Steiner also went as very young as teenagers to that. It was a thing. But I go back to what Nicci said earlier. I feel that final speech that he gives is so lame. It feels so dutiful and tacked on. Clearly, the thing that has engaged Hitchcock is the game playing and language as a form of just torture. And I mean, that he set up this little magic show where we're in on the joke. And isn't it funny how they can, all the different ways he can manipulate the audience. And he manipulates us, but even more the way that all the other characters are manipulated. And so I think there's something, if you talk about responsibility of language, I think there's something really unsettling, because I think it's all about power. Isn't it language? It's all it is power. Is that you're using language just to make fun of people or to manipulate them? And it's an incredibly cruel film. And, especially the one touching character, the father, who keeps saying, "Oh, where's my..." where he's got obviously this sick wife at home and
his son in the chest.
His son in the yes.
And in that scene right at the end, where one of the puzzles is, why does he open the chest? And it does feel a bit like, so Brandon's line is, I don't just speak, I act. But actually, he's trapped by his words in the end. It's a cat and mouse game. That's the phrase that's used in the film. And in the end, he is goaded by language. After all, he has a gun, and he puts the gun down because he's been goaded to put the gun down. And then he opens the chest. He doesn't have to, or he allows James Stewart to open the chest. He doesn't have to do that. And it's almost as though it's not that he acts and they don't. It's that he is trapped into taking his own words seriously, and it's his undoing.
I found that one of the most uncomfortable moments in the whole film. You mentioned the gun when he says, "Oh, it's right," and he puts the gun down, and you think, "Oh, don't put the gun down,"
Oh, really?
And you think, which is terrible. Why am I?
So I did not think that.
We can talk about that later.
I was just wondering whether you thought that Hitchcock himself understood that the film was confusing and something of a compromise. I thought in the first scene, when the camera is shaking, it's not Paul Greengrass shaking, but it leads to a lack of confidence. And some of the long shots, the oneers, have that shake, and it seemed to be something of a lack of confidence. And I'm wondering whether Hitchcock himself said anything about the film, or whether it was that compromise or ambiguity was known to him.
In interviews, he was always very dismissive of this film. In interviews, he only ever talked about the technical side of it, the single take. And he said he betrayed his own principles because he thought the crucial thing in cinema was editing and cutting, and he lost that power. Although I think there's some very clever moments when you can't cut where he moves close in. I think the bit where James Stewart tells a story at the end about what must have happened and the camera moves around following it and you fill it in, I think that's very clever. Hitchcock was always very reluctant to, I think, judging from the books that have been written about Hitchcock, he felt it was a disastrous, that his attempt backfired terribly because the film was a huge flop and it caused terrible trouble. I think once James Stewart was forced on him in the role, I think he thought the film was ruined. So in that sense, he thought it was a failure.
I realise the subject of Rope, what we've just been talking about, is not particularly Christmassy, and trust me, some of the films we've got coming up are probably even less Christmassy. Nonetheless, this is our Christmas film season, and we did want to let you know that if you are looking for last-minute gifts, you can very easily gift a subscription to PPF Plus. It's the work of an instant. It will be available straight away. You can have a half-year or a full-year subscription, and it will give the recipient access to all of our bonus episodes, past, present, and future, plus ad-free listening, and automatic sign-up to our newsletter. So if you would like to gift a subscription to PPF Plus, just click on the link in the show description, go to our website, ppfideas.com. It couldn't be easier. We hope the recipient will be grateful. We would certainly be very grateful. Next time in this season, a film that really is a film of ideas, uniquely talky about ideas. I'm going to be talking to the screenwriter and playwright Lee Hall, author, among many other things, of the worldwide smash, Billy Elliot, about My Dinner with Andre, a film in which two men have dinner and talk, and it is electrifying. That's next time. This has been Past, Present, Future.